So, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. This is going to be a pretty informal little talk. I just, since this conference was here and I was involved, it was wonderful to listen to Alan this morning because I was there for some of that. I was one of the world's probably first salesmen for Smalltalk. I spent a year out. When he showed the 4404, the insides there, I wanted to shout out, and they were really tough. Because one day I was getting on an airplane and I got a call right as I was already on my, and they said, no, we don't want you to go, we want you to go. And so I asked them to take the machine off the airplane. It was a small airplane. And I watched them, there was two boxes, even though it was a personal computer, there were two big boxes. And I watched them drop the machine out of the belly of the airplane onto the tarmac. I watched it go crash. And so the display was all crooked and all that, and the damn thing still worked just fine. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Those were the days. Yeah.
You didn't mention the fact that they were a little bit heavy, too.
Oh, yeah, they were heavy. I had to rent a station wagon everywhere I went. And that's how I learned Smalltalk, is I didn't know that much about it, but I took it up to my room every night when I was a salesman on the road and would stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning doing Smalltalk on the machine. And remember, once in a while I'd call up the worst rocks or somebody back in the office to ask them a question and find out stuff. So that's how I learned Smalltalk. But at that point in time, that was what, 84, 85. So at that point in time, because I got my first paycheck in 62. So that's 63, rather, 1963. So I've been doing software quite a long time. So that's me. Oh, I thought it's 50 years now. It keeps changing. That number keeps changing. So I don't have a lot of claims to fame. I haven't written any books or whatever. I was a co-creator of Scrum. I was the first Scrum coach. There's some information about me. Let's see. And I kind of quickly put this together. What about the Smalltalk in me? Where's that from? Well, I mentioned learning it as a salesperson. Then I learned about sales. Mike and I had long discussions about this. And so then that didn't work so well.
Did you ever sell anything?
Oh yeah, I sold, but not much. And but nobody sold much. Does everyone remember that?
I did.
What?
I did.
You did. Okay, good. And then I joined Mike and everyone up in Oregon, and I became in charge of training. And so I had some of the first Smalltalk training classes in the world with people like Ward Cunningham and Al Gorsbach and Kent Beck as my trainers, which was really kind of interesting. And of course, we started OOPSLA up there out of all that. And I was involved with that and helped get all that going. And then, so one of my first object projects with Smalltalk was OA tool, which is before UML. This is all written in Smalltalk. And it was one of the first visual programming tools out there, supported Peter Code's notation. And a little bit later, I built a testing framework. This is about the same time Kent came up with S-Unit. He and I would have arguments about it, and he won the arguments. But so we had OTF and OTF.
OTF was cool.
What?
OTF was cool.
Oh yeah, it was very cool. Very, very cool. So that's kind of some of my credentials as and I helped with some of the editing of Smalltalk. Oh, I can't remember. I was trying to remember the name of that magazine we had.
Smalltalk Report.
Smalltalk Report.
Yes, I've got some of those.
And then the OOPSAD, there was another one about object-oriented stuff that we did as well. So
Report on object.
there was a lot of stuff going on back there. It was a fun community, very, very small, and we sort of had fun. What about the Agile me? Well, I mentioned already, I was a coach in the first Scrum team in 1993. The Agile Manifesto wasn't put in place until 2001. And so most people don't realize that we were doing Agile long before that. I think of my first Agile project is in 1987. And in 1987, we were delivering every 6 weeks, including full schema, automatic schema migration, and all of that in 1987. That was the first project in my life where the customers came to us and said, slow down. You're going too fast. You're delivering too fast for us. We can't keep up. That was a team of about 25 people, and that was a lot of fun back there. I've been involved since then quite a bit. I did quite a lot of extreme programming work as well as Scrum work, and I've kind of gotten into the Scrum thing. I'm a CSM, CSP, all of it. And CST and CSC are the Certified Scrum Trainer and Certified Scrum Coach. The coach is kind of the black belt of Scrum. There's about, I think last time I saw there was 30 of us that had all of this in the world. So, been doing it a long time. And I spent 5 years at Serena Software being the Agile evangelist there. And then I get bored working for companies and go back out on my own. So I didn't do that one. So that's a little bit about me. So when I heard about this conference, I got some email from Evelyn. It was great. And I said, well, what's kind of interesting? And because I've been in Agile here, the question I really wanted to ask was, what was the influence of Agile, Smalltalk, on the Agile development? And so that's really what I want to talk about here, is that today. So, what's this slide? What happened to this slide? Oh, I see that. Okay. So some personal history around this in terms of Agile. Now, I talked about when I started, but in the 60s, we were Agile. And the reason we were Agile is we didn't know how to do anything. And so we worked together a lot. And we didn't know, we couldn't lay out a plan about everything we were going to do because we didn't know exactly what we were going to do. I worked tracking satellites in the for the Air Force and Air Force contracts back in the early 60s. And that was what it was like. And we did a lot of pair programming, so to speak. It may not have been on a computer because all you turn a compile would take 24 hours, and but you sat and did a lot of desk checking and that kind of thing with people. So I think of us as being Agile back then. We changed our mind, we did things, we worked together as teams, and we tried to take small bites. And then of course in the 70s, the noise paper came out, and so they're starting to talk about waterfall, and that's where that famous diagram that nobody read the whole paper on came through. Did anybody know that? He says in chat on the 7th page of that paper, don't do it that way. And the same thing happened, of course, with the manifesto, because the Cowboys got the manifesto and said, we don't have to plan, we don't have to do anything. So in the 80s, then for me, what happened was Smalltalk and object-oriented programming and all that came in play and really drove a lot of my personal history, drove a lot of how we thought about the world, how we thought about software, how we thought about working together and all that. I'm going to get into the details because that's what this is about, but that's kind of when that happened for me, was in that time frame. And then, and I think of this, I just mentioned that, 1987 is my first Agile project, was at the end of that, when we really started to get into the idea of a cadence and delivering at a regular, fairly frequent. 6 weeks, we were delivering every 6 weeks. In 1987, delivering every 6 weeks was considered impossible by most people. Nowadays, we don't. So that was kind of where I came from with that. Now, the key for me, of course, and really in terms of the history and looking back on it, is what Scrum happened. And Scrum, of course, was 1993 and 94 at Easel Corporation. And I was a coach there. So I think some people call me the first Agile coach, or first Scrum coach, actually. And but I was there for 2 reasons. One is the product was visual modeling, which is similar to this, so I had experience about that. And it was about Smalltalk. It was infant dialect, which is some Smalltalk. Purists aren't sure that's really Smalltalk, but anyhow, we won't worry about that too much. But so that's what it was. It was the infant dialect of Smalltalk. And I had a lot of experience at that time doing Smalltalk and helping them with that. And the executive there, the C-level support there was Jeff Sutherland, and he was very, very interested in new ways of doing things. And he had done a lot of work on looking at innovation, how things happen, and this in some ways was the result of work he'd been doing for quite some time on that. And so it was a very young team, about 8 people, mostly co-located, not completely, but very young and very eager to learn. And we had a wonderful attitude, very agile kind of environment of trying things out and learning new things and talking about how we were doing and willing to do the experiments that it tries. And that's one of the characteristics of Agile that's really come through strong for me during its development, is this experimental nature of it, and what are we going to try now to get better at what we're doing. We have domain experts on hand, myself, John Skumatalis was there as a domain using on the technology side, and so really talking about it. And of course, one of the characteristics of Smalltalk is you talk more about the problem than the solution, unlike many development languages. And again, a new problem, something fairly new. The market didn't understand that. We didn't know exactly how to solve some of those problems. Okay? So that's kind of my history, how I came to this, and what I wanted to say about it. Well, most of you probably know. How many of you know about the history of the Agile Manifesto? 2001, sort of there. Most of you, yeah, about over half of you there. So published in 2001. Until then, of course, the word Agile was not used in the software world. You know, we didn't have a common word to use to talk about that. But a lot of us were doing a lot of experimentation, trying things. This idea of quick delivery, things happening more rapidly, was starting to happen. Of course, as the machines got more powerful, we could support more of that, but this idea would come through. And then, of course, that's when Agile first started showing up. Now, of course, it's sort of people, I do a lot of teaching now, and many of the young people just go, oh, Agile, that's always been around as a term. Not so true. Not so true. And there's the 4 values of that, which were values that said basically we should talk to each other, and that we should consider working software as what we've needed, and we don't need to document everything out of the world, and that we should plan often, although some people read it to say we shouldn't plan at all. And so that's the Agile Manifesto that states all of that, and then the 12 principles that come with that. Now, I was trying to decide if I wanted to put that up here. I didn't. We can put it up if we want, but the 12 principles talk about particular ways, particular things that you should need to be doing, and some of the ones that apply here a lot are the sense of reflection and the sense of technical excellence that's called out in those principles. And those are things that I find very, very strong. And the whole idea that working software is how we know what's going on. And of course with Smalltalk, that's what it was. That's how it was, and that's how we did it. So what I did is I basically said, did Smalltalk have an influence on this? So what we did is we put a small questionnaire out, and we sent it out to all the signers of the Agile Manifesto. And we did not get a tremendous response, but about 50%, so we got enough to give us a little data. I didn't feel like I wanted to beat anybody over the head about this too much, but we got some good stuff. And over half, and then of course I can project on the other half, and I know over half says this, the impact of Smalltalk was moderate to large. The Smalltalk was a serious influence on the development of the Agile Manifesto and how that came about. And of course some of the people we know that did, Dave Thomas was there, Jeff Sutherland, and of course the first Scrum project was all done in Smalltalk, and XP was done by Kent Beck, was the creator of that, and of course Kent worked with Ward, and all of us at Tektronix worked there with Kent, Mike, it's amazing how many of us are here today that worked at Tektronix back then. And that was where extreme programming, a lot of the early practices, pair programming and all that came out of that, as Alan was talking about earlier. So clearly there was something going on there that had an influence, because remember at that time, Smalltalk was a very small percentage of any market language share. It was all C, C++ was going on. That's where everybody said. I remember I left Tektronix to go out on my own, and I remember people looking at me and said, well, you're going to do C++. I'm like, no, I'm going to do Smalltalk. And they said, but C++ is so many bigger. And I remember looking at people and said, well, I'm just going to be me. All I need is 1 or 2 customers at a time. So, and that worked for me for 12 years. I did Smalltalk. So Jeff Sutherland, when he talked about, these days when he talks about the origins of Scrum, he talks about a lot of influence from Xerox PARC in terms of the things that Xerox PARC is known for as having developed. And he lists here as predominantly one of the 6 major factors for that was Smalltalk, the introduction of that language. So when I asked the questions, I was sort of kind of interested. I broke up, the survey was very, very small. It took people about 3 minutes to fill it out. But we asked people, what was the, was it the language that did it? And what did it have a strong impact? And it was moderate, but the language wasn't the strongest one, which I thought was very interesting. But people who did say the language was important said that what was important about it was these two things. It was objects everywhere, because at that time, objects as a dominant metaphor was not well known. And that, of course, was a change for people. And so some of the people who commented on this said that it was the fact that it was objects everywhere. It made it easier to talk about things it's easier to talk about. And then this side of it here, this programming by intention, which was more in the culture perhaps, but the language made it very easy. Dan was talking earlier today about having languages which are very easy to read. And that's what part of what Smalltalk brings to the table. And so what we did is we found that we spent more time talking about what we wanted to do, not how we wanted to do that. And one of the strong aspects of Agile development is to separate those out and let the what be talked about from the business side, looking at it and making your decisions about what's valuable to do based on that, but letting the teams, the people actually doing the implementations, worry about the how and separating that out. So I see that a strong influence on this separation here coming out of the language, and that's some about the culture as well as Smalltalk. So the next, and so again, in terms of the language, I happen to, I brought this with me. This is my, a stolen copy of the.
What did you steal it from?
Which
it
library?
Comes from, I think I bought it. It comes from the Exxon Nuclear Library.
See?
Where did I get it? Anybody know where I got this? I get it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's really
Oh.
So,
What's the statute of limitations on theft from library?
oh, I don't know.
It's about 10,487 years.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
yeah.
The half-life.
I'll go down.
Or 4 gallons of gas, whichever is more expensive.
Yeah. So Dan, I was interesting listening to Dan today, because Dan had an article in here on the origins of the language, and so this is written in '81, and I was reading that to kind of help myself a little bit with how things started, and these are the keys that he had little sentences about each one of these, but these are some of the things that I felt that they were taking into account that really is simpatico with the Agile kind of way of being. And first, as I mentioned, this idea of experimentation, that you want a language, you want an environment that allows you to try things out. And there are some people teaching Agile now who literally say the retrospective is not about what went right or wrong, and it is about that, but it's actually the beginning of the next sprint. They look at it as, what are we going to do differently? What's the experimental metaphor that we want to do for the next one? Another item that Dan mentions in that article is personal mastery. And it's really about excellence. And then right there in the Agile Manifesto, it says one of the principles is technical excellence is important. And that we want to foster that idea and really emphasize that and expect that. We can't expect a great team if people aren't technically competent, and well, more than competent, actually. And so we have this sense of mastery. I've been on very, very high performance Agile teams. The entire team has this sort of almost glee about taking on new work and looking at new things, and the attitude is kind of like, what can we do now? It's fun and interesting, and it has this kind of feel to it, rather than, oh, we gotta fix a bunch of bugs, and we gotta do this. A very different kind of attitude about it. Good design, along the same lines. How do we, so the language helps with design, makes it easier. Look at this one, framework for communication. The first value of the Agile Manifesto says we have to talk to each other. We absolutely have to talk to each other. So this was built into the language then, just by Dan and what he was talking about. And also this one to me, which I found the uniform metaphor. I was tickled today when Dan put up the Boolean, because that was my aha moment on Agile too. When I looked at how Booleans worked, it's just that suddenly all sorts of lights went off for me. And it's something about that simplicity, the elegance of that, which I think is important in all software development, for a really great software to be like that. And
Haven't you also seen, though, some spectacular misuse of the Smalltalk programming language? I mean, I'm thinking of two examples that I've seen where, you know, I saw a spectacularly elegant implementation of a Fortran computed go-to statement in Smalltalk.
Oh.
And the other was actually a Stanford PhD computer scientist that was quite fluent in assembly language. And he had figured out how to use Smalltalk for all the world to look like assembly language.
Oh, yeah,
And so
I've seen a lot of
I-
C code written in
And so the
Smalltalk.
That's
question
hard
is,
to do.
but they're competent, they can do things.
They consider it a personal challenge.
But the question is it the language or is it the underlying notion of objects that's really critical to?
Well, I think that the underlying notion of objects, I think, is very, very important. And for a lot of people, the fact that you had to use for me, I'm just, by the way, this whole talk is just my opinions about stuff, but you don't have to throw things at me, Tom. What my experience of that was that because Smalltalk forced you to use objects, Tom, then if you could get it in your head to do it, then it worked very well. But yes, it made strange things if you didn't want to do objects, right? And interesting, you know.
I was telling someone at lunch that I did a review of a project and somebody had a Smalltalk class that was named Process Claim Form Manager Entity. And my conclusion was they hadn't quite gotten the concept.
Yeah. Well, but isn't that true anytime there's a paradigm shift or whatever, you see that happen? I've seen classes with methods that had 800 lines in them as well, so you knew that wasn't. So, but I was just quite pleased to take a look at what Dan, and then he did more of that today, so that was really wonderful about that. Now, the second question I asked was, what was it about the environment? Was that part of it? Was that the reason? Because I think of Smalltalk, the language, which is, you know, has a simplicity and elegance to it. Usually, when I used to teach Smalltalk, we figured we teach you the language, the semantics of the language, the syntax of the language. You can teach in 20 minutes. The rest of it was all just libraries, right? So then the environment, what does that buy? And I listed a bunch of features and asked people which ones they thought were important. And part of it was this rapid development cycle. Remember back then, you know, in the 80s, he was talking about, oh yeah, how long it would take to do this stuff. But normally, you know, even today, I see people that are working with, you know, compilation cycles that are measured in hours, even today. And yet, you know, 20 years ago, we were measuring it in seconds. And so it was really pretty amazing about that. So that was part of it. And it goes along with that experimentation. And then some of the practices we think about now were sort of built into the language. Refactoring browsers came along a little bit after Smalltalk 80, but they came fairly quickly. And this idea of keeping the design up to date and keeping it alive and well, which we find these days as critical for highly agile projects. Without that attitude of refactoring, improving, and keeping the code clean, agile projects come to, you know, they get slower and slower and slower. These days we talk about it using the terminology of technical debt. That's one of the kinds. There's other kinds of debt. That's one of them. And then this idea of exploration. Again, I mentioned I learned Smalltalk kind of in my hotel rooms and being a salesman on the road. And I love the show it and do it and those explanations, explain it in the Smalltalk 80 environment, which just allowed me to get lost in the code. And I would get lost for an hour or two and then come back out and go, look, time to go to bed. I'm going to be awake in the morning. But, and this attitude of experimentation. And that the environment made it really, really easy to do all that. And those are kind of some of the factors that people mentioned that they saw. But clearly, the strongest factor was the cultural aspects. What it was about teams of people doing Smalltalk. What was that like? And of course, the big one is collaboration. You know, first Agile Manifesto value is about collaboration. How do we work together? How do we really understand what's going on with each other? The kind of attitude of pair programming that Alan talked about with Ward and Kent and how that moved out into the world. And an idea of testing. If you have workspaces, pretty easily you suddenly go, oh, we have workspaces, let's just save them. And now we suddenly have ways to retest, and then of course those turned into S-Unit, which is now turned into a huge area of unit testing. And that sort of attitude of doing something small, taking a small bite and testing it, was built into the culture. So all of us that acted as viruses and went out into the world teaching Smalltalk through courseware, coaching, and all that, brought that with us as we went out into the world. This is one of mine. I want to have fun. And it seemed to be a lot of fun for a lot of people. Getting stuff to work, of course, is the thing that makes things so fun, is you get to see stuff happen right away. And that was part of what happened in the Smalltalk environment, this ability to just do something and have it work right away. And then one of the things I loved about it, if it didn't work, it said, well, I don't know, what do you want? Tell me what you want. And there was this kind of attitude of, well, I'll go as far as I can, but now I'll help you figure out what you might want to do next. And I just mentioned pair programming, this idea of a couple people sitting down on the machine, which is a big part of I wish we'd see more of it going on these days, but there's still quite a lot of it going on. So that's what I got out of the survey. That's what I got, was this sort of attitude about, that's what I asked about, and these are the things that people came back with. And now I thought I'd talk a little bit about what I'm seeing. I'm very active in the Agile community. I thought I'd talk a little bit now about what I see and see how stuff's going forward, and tie this back together a little bit. So, we're seeing a lot of issues around technical excellence, which of course is something to me Smalltalk brought to the table, in spite of Tom's experience with poor object design and all that.
They were former Tektronix people.
Oh, I'm sure they were. And that is that we're discovering more and more that I work with a lot of, I'm in Silicon Valley these days, and I work with a lot of people who have thrown together a lot of code. And they're having a lot of trouble with it now. And they want to go Agile, and they can't. And it's because of this legacy problem. I love Michael Feather's definition of legacy code. Legacy code is any code that doesn't have a test. And so we have people writing legacy code today. And we're seeing some of the most incredible things we're seeing going on these days, where 6 people write some software they sell for $5 billion or whatever it is. And a lot of that is around technical excellence as well. Good technologies matters, and I feel that for us, for myself in my world of trying to help people move to Agile more, we often, for instance, let's give an example of one. The testing community is known for at least 20 years that automated testing works. And so right now we don't recommend anyone start an Agile project unless automated testing and continuous integration is in place. Or if not, then that's the first thing they do. And to me, this is sort of acknowledging that technology can help us with this, can help make things better for us. And this technology and testing, that sort of stuff, to me, I learned a lot about that out of the Smalltalk world. Having a clear vision, the word metaphor was used by Dan in his discussion of language. But what is a vision? What's going on? I present Agile as a way to restrict how we're thinking, because there's an infinite number of problems in the world, and there's an infinite number of solutions to every problem. And really what we're trying to do as we're solving problems is we're getting rid of all the stuff that we're not going to do. And one of the Agile Manifesto principles is, what are we not going to do? How do we say no? How do we do that? And having a vision is part of that. In the Scrum terminology, that's the highest level of planning, is vision setting. And it seemed to me that my experience with Smalltalk was it was always easier than in most other places I've been to talk about the vision, because you talked about the problem in the domain of the problem. So that's what I saw going on there. Focus. Focus. Trying to get people to do one thing at a time these days is very difficult, and yet it is a key item. And again, this is sort of my you in a lot of this, but I know for me, the ability to write a small piece of code, see how it could work, and get it to work, lent a natural kind of focus to how I worked and how I work with stuff. And so that was something that I think matters a lot these days to getting Agile to work right. Small bites, the same thing. I'm saying the same thing different ways here now. I know my wife, I used to do a lot of Smalltalk programming at home. Corey would sort of, want me to stop, and it was always hard because everything you did would just take a little bit of time, but you always knew as soon as you finished that, the next thing you wanted to do was. So it wasn't as though you had this big picture, and then you worked on it for 4 or 5 days, and then it was all over, and you go, now what am I going to do? It was like, oh, I'm going to do this. Oh, now, I'm going to do this now. Oh, I'm going to do this now. Especially half the time when the system's telling you what it wanted next. And so this kind of gave us this hot sense of small bites. And so one of the bylines I sometimes use with Agile development is that it's reality-based program project management, and that's what I kept hearing when I saw Smalltalk. It's what's going on now. Let's go look at what's going on. It'll tell you what's going on. Everything is right there, and it has the visibility that we need for empirical processes. And Agile is an empirical type process. We need the visibility, we need to know what it means, and we need to have the power to change it. All those things were true in Smalltalk. You could read any part of the code. Essentially, the entire system was written in Smalltalk. You could see what it was, and you could change anything you wanted, both to learn, to see what was going to happen, and to make improvements to make it better. And so that empirical side of that really showed up and helps you see what's really going on. And I've mentioned this already, testing quite a lot. So I'm curious, I'm going to stop there for a moment, because I'm curious, so many of you are doing Agile here, what do you think is the reason you tie together Agile and Smalltalk? Given what you're doing right now, how do you bring it together? Go ahead.
It's our environment, so it's kind of it's an interesting question because we're a Smalltalk shop and we do Agile, so it's not a question of bringing it together.
Right.
It's just the way it's always been. But for us, it's been, I remember reading the XP ideas in the original Smalltalk report and stuff, and it was an evolving concept. So it's not new, it's just the way we do things. We don't think of it as something else.
Right. So I guess maybe I'm trying to do a little bit here is to step back a little bit and look at it. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that, because I understand what you're saying, I'm jealous because I wish I could do more of that right now. But is that what might we do next that would help with this? Is there anything we can do in languages or environments or whatever that would help with bringing more of this sort of sense of agility into the world? So that's kind of one of the questions I have. Anybody else got a comment they want to put out? Yours?
What we found out, basically, that we typically don't have the solution when we start working.
Yes.
So we don't know where you want to end. We have a vision where we want to go, as you said there, and we typically do multiple approaches. So experiments, say we could do this way, try it, and then we do it in another way, try it again, maybe it takes forward, maybe we need 3 tries. So, and letting the rest go. Said, okay, that was not where we want to go. That's something typically towards the customer, we said we do a feasibility study first.
You have to go to some name. So
right.
It's a proof of concept.
And at the end of the feasibility study, and then they give me the quote for the second part. I said, no, never, because you do the feasibility first, and then we come up with a quote, how we want to, a recommendation and a quote. And they buy it. So, because technically we would say, okay, if they don't know, and they have a strategy to do that. So these kinds of things is something we have been, and Agile helps there because it is planning in steps.
So another reason I'm kind of wandering around a little bit here, another reason I wanted to kind of do some of this stuff is that there's been a huge upsurge in Agile, and now we're starting to feel the backlash is starting to come up pretty strong now. So we're starting. This morning I saw a big, when Agile's not working. The CIO magazine had a big article. Agile doesn't work,
Oh, good.
you know,
good
and
experts.
so we're starting to see the backlash and all of that.
So
And
that
it'd be interesting to see
happened,
what's in
that
it.
happened with objects too.
Oh, I
So
really
yeah,
remember.
No, I mean, so.
That's still
Oh,
done
yeah,
with
about that.
objects in Ruby.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
right.
mean, I'm seeing all the stuff you're talking about. I work in Ruby on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, right.
And all the things that you're saying, this is why Smalltalk and Agile go together so well.
Right.
Those are the things that we fight with on a day-to-day basis. The tools suck, the libraries suck, the community is horrible, the people are crappy. Like, it's just, all these things are terrible, and those are the things that we have to fight in order to be agile.
Yeah, Tom?
So I was trying to understand what you're saying, and having received my first paycheck shortly after you received yours. Couldn't you say about other interactive development environments that were popular? The first one I might have run into was GE time sharing, followed by things like APL and Visual Basic. Very interactive development environments with some of the same characteristics of the development environment for Smalltalk. But is it the development environment? Is it the object model underneath? Is it the interactive development tools that are somehow more sophisticated in the Smalltalk world?
Well, I think that's what my little, lightweight research I did was. It says, well, the language matters some, the environment matters a little bit more, but the culture is what really matters. It was really the attitude of the culture. And, we look at, that map that Alan put out there showed, stuff starting in Tektronix and kind of working out that viral kind of sense of it. And I feel like that was really all those other things, I might say, were necessary, but not sufficient. And then the culture kind of tapped it off. And without that, I'm not sure how much I didn't work in any of those environments, so I don't know. I went directly, this is weird, I went directly from assembly language to Smalltalk.
Me too.
So it was
It's like, whoa.
yeah.
Yeah, we, actually, by the way, I started getting paychecks way before you. What we ended up doing, our chief technology person came in and said, we have to do Agile.
Yeah.
And so everybody got in, trained, and so forth. And what we ended up doing about 2 years ago, we broke into 3 Smalltalk groups, and now we use Kanban. And what that allows us to do is the customer basically prioritizes their stuff, projects, whatever enhancements, and we just pull the stuff off the top. And they now have a feel for how long it takes certain things to get through the system. And then, if you interacted with many places that use Kanban?
Oh, yeah. So we're seeing, so primarily right now, in my experience right now, Scrum and Kanban are the 2 major things we're seeing. And they have slightly different characteristics. So
right.
There's, I don't know if I want to get into this right now, but Scrum is more useful if you're having trouble with your teams and they don't know how to finish work and all that sort of stuff, then Scrum is a little more useful. Once things are flowing, or you have an organization where people are tending to work by themselves, and Kanban is a good place to start. But Jeff Sutherland is funny about this stuff because there's 3 levels of Scrum, and Class C Scrum is essentially Kanban. There's not much difference between the 2. I don't want to, we can go into Agile if you want, I can do that all day, but I was mostly trying to explore this sort of boundary between these 2. So, simple. Oh yes, there was one more slide here. Okay, that's what it was. Keeping it simple, of course, is one of the Agile principles, is keeping stuff simple. And that's, to me, there was nothing simpler. To me, just the infix notation made everything simpler. You could read stuff easier. It was easier to read and all that. So there was less distance, semantic distance was there. So what else I got? And I thought I'd mention this. The other slide was from Jeff Sutherland, and he went this one here. This slide was something he was using when he was talking about Wikispeed. And I don't know how many of you know, but there's a car company in Portland or Seattle, I can't remember right now, Joe Justice, and it's called Wikispeed, and they are developing, they're using Scrum to make new cars, like Tesla's doing, except they're using Scrum. And it's really interesting because and they're using 1 week sprints, 1 week cycles to build new cars. I mean, cars, you know. How are they doing it?
They deliver a working car at the end of every sprint.
Yes, and a working car by definition means they can take it out on the freeway and drive it.
Wow.
And they do that every sprint. But they do it this way, and I'm seeing companies that are starting to recognize that we need this more in software too. They use Scrum for the management, the collaboration, but everything is driven by tests, so massive automated testing and strong component architectures. And we're seeing some of that work being done by Eric Evans in domain-driven design in there. That's bringing some of the object technology forward, where we're seeing a lot of the power there is actually in the business side more, to help the business be able to talk about their problems in a way that we can implement with less impedance management. Yeah, I didn't want to go to this a lot, but I thought that was interesting that they believe that these were the key factors that made that happen. And of course, component architectures and good testing were something that came in Smalltalk.
So that's just from Smalltalk, I mean, good test and
Yeah.
good design.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I agree with you on both those things. So, okay, we just went through that, so that was it. Any other questions? Yeah, comments or whatever?
I don't have experience with Scrum or Agile, at least not in the official approach.
Official way.
Yeah.
Right, yes.
One of the questions you brought up earlier was related to the backlash that is being seen. I'm wondering, when you're using these approaches, are more of the costs up front, pay now rather than pay later, or is it maybe the accounting that might try to be done is so much different for something like this that some businesses don't know how to deal with the costs, and so there's a backlash maybe related to that from the financial side of things?
Well, my opinion is that this transition takes time. Basically, all the mid-level and upper-level executives in the software business have been successful during waterfall. I mean, it's changing.
Yeah.
And so asking them to change how they do their work is very difficult. And so it takes, sometimes we think we have to let them all die off, right? And we get to do it. But, and part of it has to do with promises. Is that, businesses are in place to make money and all that. And a great deal of the culture for most businesses is about promising things and getting them. And Agile resists heavyweight promises. And I think that's one of the major problems. The accounting that's such a bad deal, but
So you mean Agile is more realistic in that?
More,
You're not
yeah.
over-promising, you're not over-promising.
Yeah.
Well, there's another aspect that you didn't mention, that in the federal government, for example, the acquisition process is diametrically opposed to anything resembling an Agile approach. And so, the quote Agile projects that are set up under firm fixed price contracts with a dedicated set of complete requirements in the beginning.
Yeah.
They don't quite.
But there's been some interesting, Rand has done some studies on successful 18-year projects in the DoD that indicate that the requirements growth on successful projects is about 35%. So people are starting to acknowledge the nature of emergent requirements in complex systems. The DoD, I don't know if you know, I'm sure you know about this, but the DoD, in one of the laws, it actually says for software running projects you should be using Agile. And what we're studying is all the companies that are applying, these are old companies being run by ex-military people for the DoD, and they refuse to be Agile because they're making most of their money on overruns and cost overruns. And so Agile goes in. Now, I don't want to get into that too much, but I want to give you one other thing, is that because I'm seeing some cool things that are going on. we were using some of the innovation games, the agile marketing kind of techniques, figuring out what people want and all that. So I've been involved for a couple of years now with this set of people that are helping the city of San Jose. And every year we get about 200 people together from across all over the city, young people, old people, business people, you know, all over the city. And then we play some games for budgeting and all of that. So we're starting to see some of that moving into government, and it's very cool. It's very cool what we're seeing. So I want to leave you with that a little bit too, because it's beyond that. But I think I'm out of time, and I'm done, so thank you very much.